camping trip with Predator, my family has a camping timeshare and we used to go camping for weeks at a time in the summer. My dad had to work, so he would stay at home and come meet us at the campgrounds Friday through Sunday. The campgrounds had a pool, miniature golf course, basketball courts, and we'd gone for so long that my mom was comfortable letting us wander since there was only one entrance/exit. When I was around 8, but was small for my age, so I looked around 5, I met a little boy who was camping with his single dad for a few days. He came to our campsite a lot and knew we were staying for a while. I was pretty sad when he left, but his dad said they'd come back sometime soon. A few weeks later, his dad came to the campsite right after my mom left to take a shower. He told me his son was coming later that week. He asked where my parents were and I told him my dad doesn't come until Friday and my mom always takes a shower at this time. He said bye and left. The next day he came by at the same time and told me that he had just found some kittens and asked if I wanted one. I said yes. He told me he kept them in his tent and I could come pick one. Now this guy wasn't a stranger. My mom had met him when he picked up his son from our campsite. So I didn't get the creepy stranger vibe and get okay going with him. We walked towards his campsite, but then he told me he had actually moved them to his truck so they wouldn't get too hot, which made sense to me. He pointed to his truck right outside the gates of the entrance. I start walking towards the entrance with the guy when my dad pulls up. He got the day off work so he could spend more time with us. He asks what's going on and I say Tommy's dad said he has kittens in his truck and I can have one. My dad get out of the car, tells me to run back to the campsite, so I do. When my dad gets back, he tells me to never go alone with an adult anywhere, even if I know them. I asked my mom years later about the whole thing and she told me my dad kicked the crap out of him and called the cops. Disturbing camping encounter. Background: I work summers as a camp counselor in the northern parts of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So, like a routine camping trip, we canoe out to the site and set up our tents. Me and my co-counselor, Mike, take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts and play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories. Cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed and they head into their tents, which were positioned a small walk away from the shoreline but still in line of sight from where we had the fire pit. So the kids have gone to bed and me and Mike are shooting the shit by the water, smoking a cigarette. Just basically hanging out before we decide to head into our tent and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day, and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch-black night water, when we saw a small light approaching us slowly and slightly above water level. We speculated what it could possibly be for a few minutes, before it came close enough for us to see that it was mounted on the front of a kayak and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now, it is important to note that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with stranger encounters in an environment where we are responsible for a group of children on public property. I was prepared to give the mystery paddler the typical speech about how we are camping with a group from a recognized organization, and we would respectfully ask that they find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bone as the light drew nearer. Paddling this kayak was a woman, who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long, wisps of gray hair that was trailing in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot under all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke I realized she was missing most of her teeth. "Are all your children safe in bed?" she asked me, pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond and quite frankly shitting myself, I responded by telling her that they were fine and she had to leave. "That's good. Just as expected for this time," she said with a smile, then turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, myself and Mike were legitimately very creeped out, not only by the appearance of this mystery woman who resembled a freaking corpse, but also her inquiry on the whereabouts and safety of the kids we had brought on this trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire after checking on the kids. Half an hour later is where shit started to get really creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip for kids the same age group. She sent me a text which read something along the lines of, "Hey, Sean, stop screwing with us. This isn't funny, my kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know I had just seen someone near my campsite that seemed eerie, and that I was not trying to play a joke. Apparently one of their kids had opened their tent door to take a piss and seen a woman with long hair standing with her arms open towards them near the shoreline. Chased on a family camping trip, growing up, every summer in July/August my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. Some of my best childhood memories were made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, and water balloon fights with my cousin's neighboring kids in the campground. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory has stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 p.m. at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheapy little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs. So I decided to go off for some privacy to return the call. I took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that at the end leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom, I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was heading was vacant. There were no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark. So, I chose a campsite. I sat down at the table. The lights from the distant bathroom from up on top of the hill behind me were illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all these empty campsites are. I could see it was a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campground for a night walk. The people I see usually have flashlights though. This person did not. I wasn't creeped out at this point. No reason to be. I was just watching curiously. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline and that it was a man I was looking at. I also noticed his pace slowed down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing on my cell phone. A minute or two passes. And now, he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I am at. I don't know if he knew I could see him. He was staring at me, and I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavy-set and tall. I could also make out that he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much for facial features, but I would guess I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s. Alarm bells were going off in my head now. My mind had turned to mush at this point. I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. Then, he started to move again. He was tiptoeing towards me. Very carefully. Like, he didn't want to make noise. He put one foot in front of the other. Leaned forward in a slight hunch form. It looked like he was about to charge towards me. In that moment I snapped out of that mind-mushy frozen state, and leaped off the picnic table and started running through the campsite back towards the trail. Thud thud thud, I could hear him trampling behind me. Leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail, once he got close to whereabout I was. I heard the sound of twigs snapping and a "oof" noise that came from the man. Which I can imagine maybe he tripped or almost tripped or maybe got face-slapped by a tree branch. Most likely, he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason was, it caused him to stop chasing after me. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running. Running and running until I made it back to my family's campsite.